The haunting in room 304. It was a stormy night, and the old hotel on the hill stood dark and silent. Locals say the place is haunted by the spirit of a woman who died there decades ago. Intrigued by the stories, I decided to explore the mansion alone. On my third night there, I was assigned room 304 after my original room needed unexpected maintenance. That night I heard faint noises. At first it was just a soft tapping sound, like someone lightly drumming their fingers on the wall. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the old plumbing or the creaky structure, but the noises grew louder and more persistent, resembling a rhythmic knocking. I called the front desk to complain, but they assured me no one was in the adjacent rooms. Unable to sleep, I decided to investigate. I checked the hallway but found nothing unusual. As I returned to my room, I noticed a small door next to the closet, one I hadn't seen before. It was partially hidden behind a thick curtain. I opened it, revealing a narrow, dark staircase leading down into the depths of the hotel. Curiosity got the better of me, and I descended the stairs, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness. The air grew colder, and the smell of damp and decay filled my nostrils. At the bottom, I found myself in an old abandoned part of the hotel, long forgotten and filled with dusty, broken furniture. Suddenly I heard a whispering voice echoing through the halls. "Help me," it pleaded. I followed the sound to a locked door. The voice grew louder and more desperate. "Help me, please!" I found a rusty key hanging on the wall, and with trembling hands, unlocked the door. Inside was a small, dimly lit room with a single decrepit bed. On it lay the skeletal remains of a woman, her eyes hollow and staring. Clutched in her bony fingers was a note. I took it and read the last desperate words. "Trapped here. Forever." As I backed away in horror, the door slammed shut behind me. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The whispers returned, now surrounding me, growing louder and more insistent. "Help me. Help me." And then silence. The story cuts off here. What happened to me? Did I escape, or am I still trapped in the haunted depths of the hotel? The Abandoned Asylum. Years ago, I worked as an urban explorer, documenting abandoned buildings and forgotten places. One of the most notorious locations I ever visited was the old Ravenwood Asylum. Closed down in the 1950s after numerous allegations of abuse and mistreatment, the place had a dark history and a reputation for being haunted. One crisp autumn night, I decided to explore the asylum alone, hoping to capture some eerie footage for my channel. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, I ventured inside. The building was in disrepair, with broken windows, peeling paint, and debris scattered everywhere. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. As I walked through the darkened hallways, I could hear faint echoes of distant screams and the clinking of chains. I dismissed them as my imagination running wild. But then, I stumbled upon the old patient records room. Inside, I found files and photographs of the inmates, their eyes full of pain and suffering. One photo in particular caught my eye, a young woman named Emily, who was admitted for reasons unknown. I continued exploring and soon found myself in the basement, where the most dangerous patients were supposedly kept. The atmosphere grew heavier, and an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness. Panicking, I fumbled for my spare batteries. But as I did, I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty halls. I called out, but there was no response. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I quickly changed the batteries and turned on the flashlight. In the beam of light, I saw Emily, or what remained of her. She was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She reached out to me, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Help me." They never let me leave. I backed away, stumbling over debris. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in on me. I turned and ran, but the footsteps followed, relentless and unyielding. I burst through the door, out into the night air, gasping for breath. But as I reviewed the footage later, I realized something chilling. The video cut off right before I saw Emily. The last frame showed me, standing alone in the dark, my expression one of sheer terror. Did Emily's spirit attach itself to me? Will I ever be free from the horrors of the asylum? The shadow in the forest. Living in a small town surrounded by dense forests, I often went hiking to clear my mind. One evening, just before sunset, I decided to take a new trail I had discovered. The path was overgrown and rarely used, but it promised a scenic view at the top of the hill. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the sounds of nature surrounded me. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew eerily silent. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I pressed on. I reached a clearing and decided to rest for a moment. That's when I noticed something strange. A dark figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the trees. It was tall and humanoid, but its features were indistinguishable in the growing darkness. I called out, thinking it was another hiker, but it didn't respond. Instead, it stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Feeling unnerved, I decided to head back. But as I retraced my steps, I realized I was no longer on the path. Panic set in as I tried to find my way, but the forest seemed to close in around me. The air grew colder, and the once familiar sounds of nature were replaced by an oppressive silence. I stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. Desperate for shelter and hoping to get my bearings, I went inside. The cabin was in disrepair, with broken windows and a collapsed roof. As I looked around, I found strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was circling the cabin. I peeked through the window and saw the same dark figure from before. It was closer now, and I could make out its hollow eyes, staring directly at me. I grabbed a piece of broken wood for protection and waited, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the door creaked open, and the figure stepped inside. It moved with unnatural grace, its eyes never leaving mine. I swung the piece of wood, but it passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. The figure reached out, its hand cold as ice, and touched my forehead. My vision blurred, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread and despair. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor, the cabin nowhere in sight. The sun was rising, and the familiar sounds of nature had returned. I stumbled back to town, my mind racing with questions. What was that figure? And why did it let me go? What did the shadowy figure want? And will I encounter it again?